No one.
Voices of Terminus. Josh. I'm joined by Josh today. Say hello, Josh.
Hi, guys.
And it's going to be a quiet show today because Alexa ain't around. And we have Shy in the background to take your thoughts, ideas, questions towards the end of the show for us to answer. And we want to give a shout out to Nekrios, who's joined our team to help us out in the back end prep for these shows. So a shout out to you, man. And before we kick off the expansion cycle discussion, another few shout outs to Sacred TV or Sacred, and obviously to Basgrim as well. Zathras, if you're there, can you link the latest interview that Basgrim did with Jopper at PAX East, and link to Basgrim's YouTube channel, please? Because we're not doing the Tavern Talks as frequently as we used to, so I thought it would be only fair to give out a shout out during our regular show as well to those guys for the fantastic job they're doing. So anyway, today we're going to talk about expansion cycles, content versus frequency, and obviously we're going to look into expansions as well, what kind of things we'd like to see. And before we get into it all, I'm going to read the definition of an expansion cycle, basically. So what is an expansion cycle? Game developers have long been trying to optimize a path needed to get fresh content into their established games. Traditionally, this has been in the form of purchase expansions, which often introduced substantial changes and updates. However, more and more producers are opting for smaller, quicker content updates, often called DLC. So that's basically what an expansion cycle in a wrap is. And we're going to look at content versus frequency and weigh them out. And let's start off with the first one. So, more content or quicker updates. Is there an optimum schedule for content release for players? What do you think about that one, Josh?
I think that I'm torn on this discussion, simply because I love to see new parts of a world. For me, that's amazing. I sometimes cannot wait to run around exploring new content that is going to be released into the world. However, on the flip side, does it change the game up so much that I can't really identify what was happening in the previous run of expansions or game itself? So yeah, for me, I'm torn as to how they should do it and what frequency they should do it and what level of content they should be releasing on a regular basis. So I'll just start off with that, Salvo.
Yeah, so I'm kind of on the same page. It's you can't really put a optimum schedule on content releases. It all depends on so much that comes into it. The content that's been put in there, the fiction, the setting, the abilities, the mechanics of the game, and obviously everything evolving around all of that. So far, let's have a look at it from this point of view. In previous MMOs that you've played, Josh, what has been the release cycle for most of those, and were you fine with it, or would you rather have seen something different happen?
Well, I think they probably the biggest one for me has probably been EverQuest 2 and its annual cycle of expansions that it wants to release year in, year out. I found them way too quick, and again, it all depends on the crowd that you have. ultimately, because for people to run through these new expansions on an annual basis, it puts the people under huge pressure to try and get through that stuff, and then to go and raid the content that they're trying to push out. And certain guilds can blow through that stuff within like a month or two. Others will struggle to even take down the first few raid bosses at the end of the expansion before the next expansion cycle releases. So that's EverQuest 2. So that's an annual one. I found it quite rushed ultimately. Yeah. You look at the likes of WoW, and that I think is on a 2 to 2.5 year cycle of its expansions, and I think that's too long, actually. But I think that what they've tried to do ultimately is release smaller patches to add content that way to stop people from being bored.
Yes, it's definitely not an easy one from a developing standpoint. There's two sides to this coin. You've got the players who are eager to dig into the new content. Then you have the developers who want to provide some level of quality in their content releases. And in some cases, some companies have just, rushed out stuff for the sake of, we need to put something out there because there's such an outcry for content. And I think here as well, you can't really put a time frame on it, at least not for what we're going to be talking about later on in the discussion. There's definitely ways to expand the expansion cycle with additional content that isn't necessarily seen as an expansion, but that impacts the game and the way we're going to engage into the game. And somebody's already mentioned something like this earlier on in the show. I didn't want to say something yet, but it all depends again on how big an update, what's the content involving that they're going to be putting out there. Does 2.5 years justify it? Does a year justify it? And for me personally, I would prefer not having a fixed date. It's basically go by the feel of your gut. Look at your player base, see what they're doing, see how many people are repeating again and again. Engage with the community, see what the feedback is in the forums and everything. There's so many ways to track all of this when it comes to expansions, and keep an eye on it to see. Okay, so it looks like this. The core game's coming towards a filled void. Now's the time to think about putting out a expansion or something like that. It's not something where I wouldn't personally put a timestamp on it and say, right, every 2 years we're going to put out an expansion, because, like you said, it doesn't matter how you're going to do it. If you put a timestamp on it and say every year, every 2.5 years, every 6 months, every 3 months, no matter how big, how small the expansion is, you're putting extra pressure now on the side of the development team. Because now they're now on a fixed time schedule to put out content.
Yeah, I think it's probably the toughest job I think the developers will have on any MMO going forward, is to stay relevant with the content that it's trying to provide, and do it on a timely fashion, so that other people aren't starved and leaving the game because they're bored, there's nothing for them to do, or they're just being flooded with content and they get lost in the game and they think, well, stuff this, we're going to leave as well because I don't have a clue what these developers are trying to do over here. So the balance for them to try and strike is crazy. And you're right, I think there needs to be some sort of forecasting tools that run in the background, measuring the development of players and how far they're getting within the game, in order for them to either increase their development cycle or decrease it based on how far people are getting.
And if you look at some of these past games that bring out frequent content, now somebody's already mentioned in chat, some of the reasons why expansions are brought out: to provide more content, to introduce new classes, to increase their funding. Are there any others you can think of? Of course there are. There are definitely many more I can think of why you do this. Don't forget, this is an MMO. This isn't a single player game that has a start and a finish. You're going to have to provide this game that you've brought out with new content, because it's a living, breathing world. If I look at an MMO, I'm thinking about a decade at least of game time in this game.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what game it is, an MMO. I want to spend at least 10 years in it, and obviously within those 10 years, I have to get a certain amount of content, satisfaction out of it. So that's another big reason why there's expansions for games like MMOs. And you can't really compare them to the single player aspect. And that's a completely different side of things. But I kind of lost my track of thought.
Yeah, but I wouldn't even look at it a 10-year vision. I think from a developer's point of view, they've got to look at it as a long-term project for themselves, obviously, because that's their bread and butter. They obviously want to make a living out of it. But for the players, it's all about fun for them.
Yeah.
So that is key. Can the developers deliver fun year after year after year to ensure that they keep the player base going? And that, I think, that is the tricky part for them.
Yeah, it's you can almost rate any MMO based on its base game when it comes to the content that's provided in that game, the mechanics and everything else. And that's true down to the bone, to the very bone. You can rate any MMO based on its original release with the content that they provided there. That's why some games are more successful than others. And if I look at what Pantheon are trying to do with their core game, their tenants and their Pantheon difference, we look at the perception system, we look at the dynamic level scaling, the horizontal progression, we look at the way they're going to engage in raid and dungeon content, the social aspect of things, the progeny system, and so forth. They've got so much. The crafting alone as well has so much depth to it.
Yeah.
And if you look at some of these dungeons as well that they created, they're vast, they're big. And the core point, though, is if I look at the lore from Pantheon, at this early stage, the amount of lore that they've put out there, every game has lore. I know that. Every game does. But the level of detail, I haven't seen this level of detail in many, many years to come, or in the past years. So you can see how much devotion they put into this. And looking at what they're trying to achieve here, it worries me personally, from my personal standpoint, to think about having expansions come out on a yearly basis or every 2 years and everything, because is there even a need for that in Pantheon? I personally think there isn't. They should have enough content to fill us with a good period of time, play the core game, and we'll get into some of the ideas later on down the road on ways to expand the time frame for content without bringing out an X-Pack and everything. So I think that these guys have enough ideas to keep us engaged, because if we think about things like about the replayability, which is a big thing for Pantheon. That's one major factor that they want to stress and put out there, is they want people to have or want to engage and replay through and the older zones and everything. They want people to always come back to these zones, and if they can implement stuff like that, that keeps us engaged, even at level 50, going back to the lower levels and everything, and there's still stuff for us to do then in those zones, then that's the last thing on my mind. And if I go on.
But just to interrupt you there, I mean, you can already see what they're trying to do as we are looking at what they're putting out in terms of the videos. You look at the Black Rose Keep or whatever, the one that you've said now, where it goes from level 8 through to level 35 or something like that. So they are making sure that the zones, the open zones that they have, are there so that you can go in at level 8, mess around there until like level 12, then move to another spot in the world where the quest takes you. Then you probably have to go to that place again, maybe between 20 and 25, then down to level 30. You might have to go back there at level 30 through to level 35. So they are building in replayability into these zones already.
And you make a good point there. And that connects to this next point that I'm going to make, that comes from Brad directly. Brad said in a previous interview that he doesn't want to create a game, he wants to create a world. And with what they're doing, with what they talked about at PAX and everything, hits that on the nail. You're in this game and you're going to go back to this zone again and again and again. It's going to impact you throughout your gaming experience, obviously to a certain period, and then you move on to the next point. But that's what this is. That's a world for me. It's a living, breathing world, and that's what we want. We want to have that engagement. Expansions definitely need to be there, but I don't think that there's a high value need for them to think about putting out content on a set time frame. So basically, go on, Josh, you want to say something?
I just want to say that I think the one area that they can focus on is opening up new zones on a regular basis rather than expansions as well. That could be another way that they can deal with it. So they've already built in that content for many, many years. And this is a way to just increase the playability. So instead of like that, they would create like a Black Rose Keep with 30 odd levels through it. And that could be a year later, they will you'll suddenly find that cave opening somewhere where you can go in, and that's suddenly another dungeon for people to run around in.
So since Josh has basically jumped into some of the alternative ways to bring us regular content and give them actually time, because this is what we're trying to do. We want to think of ways that they can introduce content.
Gotta put my foot in this.
And actually spend time on making quality expansions, because that's the thing that I fear the most. Is if, like I said earlier on, if you put too much restraint on yourself or strain on yourself, basically trying to knock out these expansions, no matter how big or small they are, at a certain time frame, they are going to automatically run into the lack of quality. And so now we're going to try and think and talk about alternatives on things that they could possibly do that gives them that needed time to work on a quality expansion. But before we get into that though, what kind of expansions, Josh, would you like to see from the perspective of size? If you look back at EverQuest 2, for instance, I think every second or third expansion used to be a bigger expansion, and in between that they had a middle range expansion, and then they had obviously some mini expansions as well. Would you like to see certain things like that happen?
firstly, the WoW situation blows my mind as to them increasing the size of the releases that they do, where you suddenly got 2 times bigger than what it used to be, that type of thing. I find that totally a waste, ultimately. So, as certain people have alluded to, they need horizontal leveling or horizontal expansion at the end of the day, so that they can release earlier level stuff, mid-level stuff, in-game stuff in the expansions. And I would rather like to see them releasing 2 or 3 new undiscovered zones on an existing map, that they can build into, rather than, oh, this content has suddenly just popped up and floated into the surface in the sea somewhere. This is a new island that you've got to now try and explore, type of thing. It's like, so boring and cliched.
I've got to look at one point that hashtag science made. And, and this is something I didn't think about, but definitely on par. You're absolutely right about this. Does an expansion have to only include added content for endgame? Absolutely not. That would be a key factor and a winning point for VR. If they even think about all level ranges and adding content for the lower levels, for the higher levels, and that's what we're talking about. Basically, they could add like little world events and or smaller events that impact a certain zone and a certain level. It doesn't always have to be content for the end game as well. So that's definitely a brilliant point you're making there, and something that I would very much love to see happen is if you're going to put content into your game, and in Brad's case, in your world, then the whole world should be impacted.
Correct.
Not just the top tier stuff where everybody, you know, where the hardcore raiders are going and the hardcore players are hanging around. It's for everybody. Your world has to basically evolve as a whole.
Yeah, and I think this is where I'm thinking maybe Brad and them are going with regards to the heritage type of system, where if you mix 2 races together, you might get a new race, but it starts in a new area at level 1. So you can, when you create the expansions, you can actually build that low-level content in for new races that might appear on a 2-year cycle, 3-year cycle type of thing as well. And I think people would love to run around as maybe a new race again type of thing, and finding things. And that way you keep the low-level content fresh as well. Yeah. And the world changing.
Yep, definitely. So, what things, Josh, could you see substitute expansions? Not exactly, not that's a poor choice of words. Not necessarily substitute, but basically expand the lifespan for the release of an expansion. What things could we put into this, into any game, any MMO, into an MMO, that could keep the top tier raiders engaged, your average players engaged, and obviously offer a lot of variety? What things could you see happen?
Well, definitely I could see them releasing new classes, new races, number 1. That would definitely add some replayability into it. I think that world events is key, and adding new world events which affect the world itself. Also for end raiders and mid players as well, to help try and change the world in the way it's going. You know, with what they're doing with systems now, they can make sure that the worlds are continuously changing within the that. So that could always also add new challenges for people that have gotten through old content.
Yeah.
Would
you even, if we look at an expansion, basically, there's new content, there's new zones, it's a new race normally released, there's a new addition to your character progression. Those are mostly the things that happen when an expansion comes out.
Yeah.
Would you like to see something different happen? Like you mentioned, world events, for instance. Would you pay money, small money, for unlocking world events, for instance, or something like that? Or would you or pay money for having, instead of having zones released or new races released, would you like to see some more of the mechanics unlocked?
For me, that is a very tricky subject, simply because, especially in a subscription game where you're paying $15, $12, $10 a month, to now suddenly fork out more money for smaller type of releases as well, be it maybe just cosmetic releases, things that might give you 1 or 2 extra items at the end of the day. Some people will definitely go for that, but what are you paying your $12 to $15 a month for when you are running through the same content that was built and that you've bought from the beginning? So I'm not too keen about paying for extra content or DLCs and things like that.
So, like I said earlier on, or just briefly a minute ago, what normally is included in an expansion. What about having stuff that is locked to a certain race, locked to a certain class, locked to a certain zone? Would you pay money for things like that? Would you even like to see something like that happen, where you might get some content released as a mini expansion or a smaller expansion that introduces you more into the lore of the halflings or the Darkmere or the ogre, or maybe you get some more insight into the monk's heritage, where he came from, or the paladin, dire lord, you name it, or maybe Avendir's Pass. They add some event in Avendir's Pass and revamp it maybe for a certain time period. Would you be interested in content like that as well? Rather than your average new update, next 10 levels, new spells and abilities, new AA system, new zones, dungeons, raids?
The only problem I have with things like that is maybe 50% of the people might go for it. The other 50% don't go for it. Then what? Then people are not going to be able to access certain things in the game all of a sudden. You've got to try and keep track of that type of things, and then people are going to get fed up and leave because they can't go where their friends go, type of thing. So I find it quite a tricky thing to try and balance and try and get it right from a developer point of view, as to how to keep the whole fan base happy with releases like that. I would quite honestly would rather add it into the subscription, where you are, instead of paying $12, you add another $3 onto that to make it $15 a month, whatever, and then you just release the content on a quarterly basis, small patches, for instance. So you can have an expansion which focuses heavily on the monk, or the next one focuses heavily on the Scar, or whatever the case may be, where people can go and assist the Scar in dealing with their race, and finding things like that. But you've already built it into your package so that it's free. Ultimately, everybody has access to it.
So let's go and have a look at content patches, because you brought it up. So what's the difference between a content patch and an expansion? Content patches are typically free. and released to everyone at the same time, often alongside a new paid expansion release. So, in that regard, Josh, should there be patches released solely for content updates, which you already spoke about, to keep the world fresh? What do you expect out of a paid expansion, and how about the free content patch? How much should the world game change in a free patch versus a paid expansion? Start off the questions.
Yeah, it's yeah, I would say for the free patches, I would say 1 or 2 new areas should pop up in the world, perhaps. I think that in that way, the developers can release new lore on a drip by drip fashion, so to speak, throughout it, and increasing the depth of the game on the little free patch basis. In the expansion, the paid expansion that might happen will be major releases to actually expand the world's evil villains, etc., that can build the story into the future. So one actually develops the depth of the world itself on the free expansions. The other one expands the world in terms of story arc and everything like that. So that's my feeling on how it should happen. Yeah. Your thoughts on that?
I'm on the same page. So you actually had a few ideas, and we actually talked about this next question a bit, with some ideas. Would frequent content patches affect new or casual players more than hardcore players? And in all, it will. Because the hardcore player is obviously going to be on top of it. People that have more time to play the game are going to be on top of these frequent content patches if they were to happen with all the changes. But that's a good thing, though, because we were talking about this before we went live. And one thing that I would love to see happen is where we have events happen in the world or content patches happen that affect the game. And I've been away for 3 months. I come back, I log into the game, and Josh has been there playing day in, day out, getting the latest content patch. I've just basically updated my game, and he's like all over it. And I'm like reading back on the log and seeing that they did an event. And Josh tells me about this, and yeah, I missed out, but that's not bad. That's not a bad thing that I missed out, because this is what it's about. Creating a world, telling stories, and everybody should have their own story to tell. And that's the great thing with having frequent content patches as well, that have smaller or little changes here and there. And the kicker to all this, Josh's idea was basically, picture yourselves in-game, and you're in this zone, and in this zone is a volcano. And this volcano, for instance, erupts. Now, there's an event going on, because this volcano's gone and erupted, and the lava's going down the hill towards a small village. The village gets burnt down. Now, the last time I played, that village was there. I come back, the village is burnt down. But what we would love to see happen here is that volcano's still there. It's dormant. It's an event that's been and passed, but it's something that is still viable to maybe a future explosion again. For instance, maybe it might erupt again, and now Josh has told me about what happened. This volcano exploded, and we had to, gather rock and all kinds of stuff and try and save this village, but we couldn't. It burnt down. It burnt down, and now it's gone. So now that thing's dormant. It's still there in the world. It's the same with having a dragon come out in the world. It's not a raid boss or anything like that.
it just terrorizes.
It terrorizes around
the landscape,
and you slay it. Now I want to see that dragon corpse in game. Put it in there, and those little changes as well are going to be things that we can look upon and tell stories about, and that's what these frequent content patches would do, and in effect would be a great thing to have, because Josh can tell me the story about him slaying the dragon, and I'll even show you where the corpse is. I'll be like, oh cool, I remember when I was here last time this wasn't there. Changing, you know, adding little things like that as well to keep our mind off of the term endgame and keep us, like, you know, from drifting towards when's the next expansion coming out, It's the small details that will go a long way. And those are the kind of things that we would love to see, and these are the kind of things that you can add as time sinks to give the developers time to work on their bigger expansions that they want to put out. And again, talking about the bigger expansions, Josh. Let's just go with it. Every 2.5 years, a big expansion comes out, or every year. Doesn't matter what time frame you want to put on it. Would you want to see 5 or 10 level upgrades every time? Or do you think that they can have a few expansions where it's only content driven, where it's not player progression driven?
I would love to see a new system, as Frog has said, horizontal. So 50 might be the max for that. Then the next 2 years might be some sort of an AA type system, up to get 100 levels of that AA type system, developing horizontal skills for your character, and then 1 or 2 other things in a 2-year cycle after that might come in. But this going from every 10 levels actually destroys the, well, this is something we'll get to later, but yeah, I'm just going to say that going up at 10 levels at a time hurts the game ultimately, in items, in old content, etc. And they need to think about that, dealing with it going forward. But the one point I just want to make is Ex Machina says that dragon that gets downed, if that dragon is downed on that server, let's say for instance, say there's multiple servers, and the one server manages to down that dragon, then he makes a fair point over there. The dragon's teeth can be farmed for, can be used for rare crafting materials on that server itself. So a few people might find dragon shard teeth, or the type of things to build special swords that maybe only a few people have on that. And then it'll become legendary. We say, oh, where did you get that dragon sword from? Funny thing is, we managed to down that dragon over there. And yeah, the sword can be taught Trakenon's tooth, for example. So there's definitely ways of building up the lore and the history of a server, ultimately. And you know, and listening to this discussion, you know, there's so much that can be done that kind of hints away from pushing for expansion after expansion after expansion. I love the thought about having updates released that impact not just only the higher tiers but the lower tiers, because that's another thing to do as well. You know, if we generally rush to level 50, you're going to come to a point in time where the twinking starts, and then you're going to skip content because you've done it and seen it all. But if they release content, and it doesn't have to be at the same time and with every single expansion cycle, and this can, you know, be random. They can even do it in droves, like the, you know, this one mini expansion that's coming out is going to affect the levels between 1 and 15, and then
6 months down the road, it's going to affect maybe 25 to 35, and then the next one affects everybody, or the rest of those levels. So it doesn't always have to necessarily be we're going to put content out there for everybody, but we can put it out for these, for that level, for that tier, for those tiers. And with doing something like that, the replayability is guaranteed, because I'm not going to necessarily rush through the content this time with my 250th twink now, because there's so much content that's been added to the game and so much rich lore and storytelling and you name it, that I'm going to want to go out there and see what happens. But another key factor as well is looking at the, like, I think Xmoka, you said it early on as well, items. Items can be a beneficial, or could play a beneficial part here when it comes to expansions, because that's another main reason why expansions are put out there, because we need something new to wear. We need new spells to be had of, because the old spells are now useless, basically. Try and find ways to add items that will carry an endless value. And it doesn't have to be something that's major game impacting. It can be minimal at best, where it's an item that you got at a low level, but it's still valuable at level 50, 60, 70. And you can even bring in stuff like that with updates, content patches, you name it, expansion packs. So small items that are spread out throughout the world, like you suggested with the teeth. Those rare teeth, for instance, being something. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the one thing that #Science says over there is that, and this is something we discussed early on as well, do you think they have that kind of stuff planned and how they anticipate crafting to be incorporated into the game? I mean, there's a Forge and Amberfay. So imagine that I would think it would be very, very smart of a development team to have lore creation writers in the background creating a timeline of 5 to 6 expansions, saying, well, this is what's going to happen in the first 2 years, then the next 2 years that'll happen. So there's a big story arc flowing through the game that has been planned out for years in advance, so that they aren't just like, okay, so what is the next expansion going to be on? I don't have a clue. So yeah, I think it's a very key thing that VR need to do, I think.
Yeah, and they've definitely got a lot going for them. That I can see them actually taking time with expansions. I don't see any rush needed. At least in the first 2 years. But let's go and talk about the cost to the players as well. Actually, one more question before we go to that. How important do you think it is for players and developers to have a mutual agreement to the future of the game's progress? Should developers listen to players more, or follow their own goals more?
In terms of story, do you think? Or is that in terms of the way the game plays? Because if it's story, if it's based on the lore and things like that, then no, I'd say to the players. Because as a player, I want to be surprised. I want to be surprised to see a new event popping up that is going to wow me, type of thing. So leave that up to the developers. Let them do their thing. But in terms of if something isn't working in the game that is seriously bugging the player base, and it's something that can be solved, then definitely I think that's when developers and players should sit down together and round table the situation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But you guys in chat are talking about stuff that we would love to dive into, but that would kind of drift the show in a complete different direction. We're trying to stay focused on the expansion side. That's why I've been trying to bite my tongue about some of the things that you guys have said, but there's some great thoughts out there. And We might get into it a little bit, but I'm not quite sure yet. Cost of players. Let's go and look at that for a minute. Your average expansion costs around, I say, about $30.
Mm-hmm.
For a big expansion that open up more possibilities for you and your characters. Do you think is that still a reasonable price? Would you pay more for an expansion?
Well, I think that's quite standard and narrow in today's times. I think that you've got multiple tiers of expansion payments that happen these days. You get the standard bare bones that you're paying $25 for. Then you've got the deluxe which will be $35 to $40. That'll give you a bit of fluff items. Then you'll get your mega one where people pay $100. That'll give you new soundtracks, whatever, for you to grab. So there's multiple ways that companies will try and fund their development teams.
So let's look at some of these in the past. And I'm going to bring up the two major ones, which is from SOE Daybreak and Blizzard. If we look at how SOE used to handle expansions, basically, they would bring out an expansion, and that had every single player expansion and the base game. And how Blizzard used to do it, I don't know if they still do it now, I think they've changed that as well, is you would have to buy every single expansion, the base game, expansion after expansion. Is there one of those that you favour more? Do you see a different alternative to that?
Well, if VR and them do it quite intelligently in terms of the expansions that they make, where they're releasing lower, mid, and high level type content to every expansion that they do it, they should try and just incorporate the base game and everything for free into any expansion prices that they do going forward. In my mind, because it is ridiculous that you would need to pay for your base game, then pay for the next expansion, if you are starting after 5 years. That's going to turn everybody off. It's going to say, I don't want to get into it.
Yeah, but let's have a look at it from this viewpoint, though. You started off from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You paid $50 for the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's 3 expansions that came out. You paid another $90 for those. So you spent $140. Now, after those, let's go with 5 years. I come along, brand new to the game. I spend $50.
Okay.
And I've got everything else already included.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fair on you, though, is it?
Would
you feel bitter? I personally wouldn't. Because
I wouldn't either.
This is a topic that I've, a discussion. You can tell why in a minute. This is definitely a discussion that I've had on and off multiple times over the years, and it's definitely one to bring up because I don't see a reason to be bitter about somebody coming in 5 years down the road and getting into the game for a lot less than what we originally paid for. Don't forget, finally, I've had the experiences prior to all that. I've enjoyed the game for 5 years going forward, so I personally think there shouldn't be a problem with something like that. But there are some people out there that feel then that hey, I've spent so much money on this game already, and now they release an expansion and all the player expansions and the core games in there. Why? So give me your viewpoint.
Well, my viewpoint is this. An MMO is all about keeping your player base happy and keeping them moving forward in the game. So at the beginning, you would release the base game, and everybody would jump aboard on that, and you would keep. That's how you would grow that fan base. And then if you're doing multiple expansions, well, that's new content that is coming in. Now, as an MMO developer, I've already received my my financial reward for creating that initial content over there. To expect to now get money 5 years down the line for content that is 5 years old, so to speak, ultimately, that would be a turnoff, at least for anybody new trying to come into the game. And you want to encourage people to come in and start moving together with the rest of the community, and not be turned off initially by such a steep price. You're never going to grow your fan base ultimately. Yep. So unfortunately, people might be unhappy with the fact that they might have paid for content initially, but that was 5 years ago. I mean, that's stuff that you got to write off.
And the thing is, how I always try and explain it is, it doesn't matter if he gets everything else before that. The expansion would have cost $30 anyway. Yeah. He's just getting, the only difference is, you've already got all those updates, and you've gone through all those updates already, so you're not really losing out. He's getting a good deal, and we're getting somebody new to engage with and play together with, and bring into this world, and that's what it's about, community.
But this is where I liked EverQuest 2's approach to expansions and things like that, is that if you started right from the beginning, you would get a time bonus over time that you would gain with every new expansion. So if you've been a subscriber for 3 years, you would get your 3-year bonus items that would benefit you, that nobody else is going to have. So if somebody's new starts, they're not going to have access to those items. And in that way, you're rewarding your old player base, but you're allowing the new guys to come in and start again. So there are ways for them to get around that and reward the old the player base of old, and allow the new guys to come in as well.
So another question that was brought into this was, would you pay for a small or medium monthly, yearly season pass to get all the expansions when they release, instead of having to buy each one at a big cost up front? Now, this is actually a friggin' good question that he's put in there, and this is actually a tricky one to answer, because season passes are mostly related to single player games, where you pay $60 or whatever, or $80, and it's with the season pass for this game, and then you get the content, the 1 or 2, 3 updates that they bring out for that game, which normally that's the maximum you're going to get out of it anyway, and then the second part comes out. So it's definitely hard to say. Would I go for something like that? It's definitely a brilliant question, because the thing is, where I'm having trouble with this one is, what would be the price tag? What would be a reasonable price tag? Because the big difference is, I'm playing an MMO. I'm engaging in a world that lives and breathes and offers me content, not just for one storyline or for a couple of hours or a couple of days or weeks. This is actually something I'll be playing for years to come, hopefully. And if you look at $80 for a single player over 2-3 year lifespan, what would you pay then for a season pass in an MMO?
Well, this is it. I mean, what we spoke about initially, where there might not be a standard window as to when an expansion might occur, or a smaller release might occur. So do you actually just pay a standard fee and then wait for when that expansion hits and then pay for that content? You're well in your right to do that. But if you want to add $5 to your sub fees, for instance, and just get all the content for free going on. Well, they should offer those packages, and you're going to find people that are going to take them up, and you're going to find people that are not going to take them up. But there are other ways of getting people to pay for them as well.
Definitely. But it's definitely a very good question, especially, looking at it from a season pass perspective as well. Definitely something that I wouldn't have thought of going into. So,
yeah, this one guy over here, Lexa, is that how you say his name?
I think it's Lexu. I think it's French or something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty weak name.
He comes in spouting stuff that we've already talked about.
Exactly. Just shut up and look at our old stuff.
Just go and rewatch the show. Go and rewind to the beginning and watch it. Shut up. Right?
Yeah. Hey, leave my Lexi alone, you big bullies.
So he says, I'd love to have an expansion cost reduced. I would love to have expansion costs be reduced based on how long you've played. Someone that's dedicated and been around for years should get something like $10, $20 off. Yeah, I definitely think there are different models that they can.
I guess we can go and expand on this discussion and talk about stuff like that as well. So let's roll with it. So Josh, carry on your thought there, mate.
Yeah. So I definitely think that, well, the fact that you're looking at the deduction over a long period of time, yeah, that can happen. But certainly, as a developer, I would find it quite tough to try and balance it all out over time as well. So I would just try and give bonuses to a player ultimately, or benefits to a player in game, and reward them that way. And then try and reduce the money that they have off the top of it.
You could even add maybe game time.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of giving you a discount for the next, for your next sub or something like that, or for the next expansion. Just get added game time, depending on how you can do it in intervals and levels. You can have like an achievement system where you become like having veteran rewards. Where those are things, but these are things though that obviously come at the developer's expense.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's definitely something to also talk about. Looking at how they can reward their veteran players as well, because that's something that has kind of been lacking over the years. Almost anywhere. Any contract that you've got, your telephone contract, your electricity contract, your mobile phone, or your contract, I guarantee you, if you're an old customer, you get treated like the last person on earth. I've seen it time and time again where new customers get the greatest offers. I remember back in the day when I had when I first started out with the new internet, I had 60 megabytes up download, and I paid $150 a month for my internet, and they brought out an offer for $29.99 for new customers coming in, and afterwards, after 6 months, it would cost them $39.99. For the exact same internet connection that I had. So I phone them up and go, well, why haven't I been informed that, hey, I'm getting a $60 deduction on my bill? No, it's only for new customers. I'm like, you're telling me that I've got to pay $150 for the exact same internet as somebody who's coming in new, and he pays $40. And this is the thing that happens time and time again in real life. And so, getting back on topic with the games, I would love to see some kind of reward system, and I think it would benefit them, but they have to balance it out and look at what they possibly can do, and not go diving in there and say, we're going to give you this, give you that, give you this. They have to basically, like we talked about at the beginning, analyze this stuff, look at what they can possibly do to reward veterans. I mean, having having little items. I mean, I loved Call of the Veteran. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I loved Call of the Veteran in EverQuest 2.
Yes.
It was brilliant.
Great.
I loved it. Those are the kind of rewards that I would love to see happen over time. When when it worked exactly. It was a brilliant spell. But let's go and talk about a few things that can occupy us or keep us occupied without thinking about expansions. So we've already mentioned having content updates come out, content patches that offer maybe some more in-depth lore coverage on certain races, classes, or a zone. We've even talked about having maybe world events happen, but the replayability, that's where I want to go back to. And looking at what VR are doing with Black Rose Keep, with having to go back again and again and again. This doesn't have to just relate to dungeons or zones. This can relate to quest NPCs as well. I've never seen it done before, where you outlevel a zone and you come back 20-30 levels later, and now this low level NPC has a new quest for you and sends you off on a new adventure. I would love to see stuff like that happen as well, where quests are also dynamic and horizontal, where that keeps me engaged with the older content, because I never know. I'm doing my thing in high tiers, but I never know what's going on. I might come back to the low level zone, and all of a sudden, this guy's got a quest for me. So that's going to keep me thinking, do the other zones have quests for me? So you're going to keep on going back and forth and engaging in the younger zones, the smaller zones, the low-level zones, engaging with new people, coming into the game. They're going to see you as this cool, this cool dude wearing this epic gear and this amazing sword and shield, or whatever your preferred class is, bow and arrow and stuff like that. And they're going like, whoa, look at this dude, he's really cool. But it keeps us engaged with the world. And I think that's another factor that can keep us engaged and away from, looking at the watch and when's the next X-Pack coming out. Those are the things that need to be put in.
Well, I definitely think that the perception system is going to be key for something like this. I think that with the levels of perception that you gain over time, will open up new quests in old zones, so that you now, for instance, you're starting in Black Dagger, whatever it is, I can't even recall, and you've got certain people at the front door that they're giving you quests, etc., and that type of thing, and you can finish them, but it's only going to get you so far. If you go back there when you're maybe 20 perception levels higher, well, there's going to be a little rat in the corner over there that a ratkin is going to be in the corner over there, and he's going to say, listen, I found this key a long time ago, which might assist you. I've seen how you've helped our people in the past, blah, 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 blah. Could you please take this key and discover what is behind these doors, because that might be a great evil that we've been trying to wipe out for forever. So the perception itself could be the key to keeping old zones fresh.
Definitely.
With content.
And it's a system, the perception system is just so it's a multitasking system. It's something that can be tasked into so many of the dynamics and mechanics of the game, not just for quests and everything. They can put that into a lot of things, Have you like find treasures and stuff like that, and get insights and stuff, and they could even have perception that basically, if you have a higher perception skill, you might actually think this is actually just popped in. What about having perception influence you in the ways of you unlocking hidden content?
Mm.
So let's say for instance now there's 3 zones or 3 dungeons in the world that can only be found at a certain perception level.
Yeah, exactly.
So now that's going to be like, mind blowing, because you'll be like, whoa, hang on a minute, perception's going crazy over here. It's like a metal detector going off. It's telling you to go this way, and off you go, and you find this hidden dungeon or zone or whatever it is. I think small things like that as well keep you engaged and hunting and exploring the world, because for me, I'm a completionist. I'm max level crafter, get all the updates and recipes and titles and achievements that I can possibly get. The same goes with my character progression, my adventuring, perception, being a keeper. I'm going to be all over that, and obviously going throughout the zone and doing all the quests that I possibly can. I'm about, completing, feeling completed.
Correct. I mean, just imagine walking on the coastline and your high-level perception kicks in and you notice bubbles coming up from the side over there. Now, they take that high-level perception, but they also have to take into your swimming skill. That you have to have a certain swimming skill as well to go and see where those bubbles lead to an underground, underwater cavern that you can only get to after your skill at swimming is level 100 or something like that. But your perception needs to be able to also pick up that the bubbles are going in there. Yeah. So they can definitely use the perception and even use other skills and build on those skills itself. Like, for instance, climbing as well. If climbing is going to be a skill, if you can have a high enough climbing skill, you can notice something up on a ledge over there, and that could be the entrance to another cave. So there's multiple ways of using multiple skills and perception to build new areas into the game.
Yeah,
quite easily. I think
it's brilliant. But let's go and have a look, because we haven't talked about these yet. We've been rambling for quite some time now, on and off, going from expansions to ways not to bring out expansions. Let's have a look at some of the examples, though. So that we're on the same page, would you want content released frequently on a fixed time frame or not? Before I go into the next
content on a fixed time frame.
Every year to the date or around that date, an expansion comes out. Or every 2.5 years, or every 6 months, or every 3 years, or every 3 months, or whatever you want to call it. You know exactly, boom, that's when expansion is going to come out. Are you happy with that?
I would be, depending on... I would be and I wouldn't be, because I would be if they get the balance right as to what they add into the game and what I'm looking forward to in terms of as I'm starting to get bored. I definitely want new content, something new to explore. So that timing has to happen. And if they do it after every year or every 2 years, for instance, then that's fine. If they're going to scratch that itch, then I'm quite happy for them to do it on a standard cyclic basis.
Yeah. So let's have a look at some of the dangers, though, that come with rushing out content or expansions. Let's not talk about content. We'll stay away from that. But expansions being rushed out. There's definitely some dangers that come with this. Like I said earlier on, the lack of quality that goes into the update. You know, the faster the cycle, the more pressure you put onto the developing team. That's definitely one, to complete the content first and foremost, to have it, you know, almost bug-free. Faster cycle means obviously less content per release. And then you've got to look at the other aspect of this. Why are expansions pushed out on a more frequent basis, a more faster basis? Because most of the time, most of these games only listen to one side of the game, one side of the players. That's the top tier player. They're all complaining about giving, you know, new content. I can understand where they're coming from. So, but at the same time, when they do new content, it only goes in one direction as well, which isn't necessarily fair on the middle class or on the lower class people that are still just roaming around the world, having fun, talking to people, casually playing here and there, 2-3 hours a week or whatever. And that's where I think past mistakes can be prevented if they focus on everybody. That's one thing that definitely needs to be approached. Is when you talk about expansion packs or expansions or updating your game with content, look at the game as a whole. Where can you add content? What can you change up? Can you maybe tell a new story or add to an existing story, and do a little content update for maybe Throne Fast and tell a story there a bit more, or Amber Fate or whatever. Look at the whole game and take that into consideration. I would love that, because that makes me have stories to tell time and time again. My experience is going to be different. I've gone through the game with my main character with this version of the game.
Correct.
I've now created a new character, and since then they've brought out some content updates where they've had some world events, where they've changed out some zones, maybe even made a zone smaller, for instance, because of events that are happening currently. They're renovating. A village is being upgraded to a city because they've taken in enough cash, or the players. There's so many players and so much money going into the main city that the main city's sponsored them an upgrade on their city. So now I'm playing with my second character, or my third, or somebody new has come into the game. He's going to experience that portion of the game completely differently than I would have, and it's definitely something I haven't seen done before. The only one who came close to doing something like that was World of Warcraft with Cataclysm. A lot of people hated that expansion.
Yeah,
I can understand to a point why, to some aspect, because it was basically something that you didn't have a choice on, but it was part of their lore. It's part of their lore, then it's kudos to them. It's up to them to do it. It's their choice. But I love that idea of having the world completely changed up. And Smarty mentioned something earlier on, quickly, Josh, before I let you go on. He was talking about having smaller events, or events that have a certain time frame on it. And this is something that we wanted to talk about as well. Instead of pushing out expansion after expansion, year after year, or every 2 years, they could add in little events that maybe build upon the next expansion coming, that hint at what is possibly to happen. So like Josh mentioned, have a new zone released. That new zone is connected to the next expansion. giving you a little insight of what could possibly happen, what is possibly to come. Maybe even have raid content implemented into the game that is only for a certain time period, where you might meet the next expansion's squire or something as a raid boss, and you chase him throughout the world till you get to a certain zone or the new zone or whatever, and then you have this nice little story come up and tell you a story about, you know, him and his lord who wants to come and run havoc over the world and burn everything to the ground. And then you have one last fight, but the guy basically bends himself off and disappears. And now you've got to wait half a year till the expansion comes out, or 2 years till the expansion comes out. Would you be bummed with something like that, Josh? If you had like a event happen that is linked to an expansion, but that's still so far away for it to come out, would you be bummed by something like that? Or would you say, hey, that was refreshing, that's actually pretty cool, that's got me excited, in the meantime I'm going to go and do this, and this with my other characters, or try and complete my main character? Would you be happy with something like that?
I would be very happy if Pantheon is a living, breathing entity, and that changes over the expansion cycles, where you see cities and villages growing and expanding and taking over new areas and moving various monsters from one section to another, etc., and you playing a part in that.
Yeah.
So that you can maybe deliver crafting materials and building materials over time to a city to help it grow, or a village to help it grow, to build good defenses around it, and so that would be, I would take great pride in saying, well, that, like, I helped build that city, I helped develop it, and from that you could see the developers actually adding raid content into those areas as time goes on, through smaller releases based on these cities being built up.
That would
yeah.
That would be really cool to actually see happen. Imagine they open up a world event where they require people to help build this new city, or this new town or village or ruins or whatnot. You have to go out and gather materials and have crafters do all this thing, and nobody knows what it's for. It's just something to do. You think, hey, you know, I'll take part in this expansion, and or this little update, and I'll do the thing. And I think that would also be pretty cool, is when we get to engage in something that the developers have put out there for us to do, and we don't know what the hell it's for, and then all of a sudden they start adding a content update comes out or whatever, and starts introducing some. You come back there, you want to go and help finish building this thing because you don't know it's finished already, and all of a sudden there's all these mobs around it, and it's completely changed, and now you're getting chased out of this area by encounters and mobs and monsters and all this kind of stuff. I think that would actually be pretty cool, having little things like that as well impact us, where we have no clue what it's about. And I just had an idea that isn't really related to this particular topic, but I want to get the ball rolling on this as well, because it does kind of touch on your whole experience. What about having a mechanic in-game that would track certain key events from the game for you in a timeline? So it's actually timelined in order, where you can actually look back and it tells you that you became a keeper and you explored this ruins in the vast depths of blah blah blah, and then you encountered the Ratkin Master so and so. So it's kind of like little key events that will track and be put in place for you to kind of look back at your history of the game, what you've done, what you've accomplished. So we could meet up in a tavern, right? We haven't got a group together. We meet up in a tavern, we sit down, we're just sitting in game, having a chat, talking, and you tell me about what you've experienced by going into your log, and then we look at my log, and mine could be completely different to yours. That's kind of, what do you think about something like that? Just as a side note, sorry for sidetracking here, guys, but that's what we do. We don't stay on topic for very long.
Yeah, no, I think that would be pretty cool. I mean, imagine going into the tavern, and there was a massive boar, for instance, that was terrorizing the village, and you, as a group, took down this boar for this village, and they've mounted that boar head on the actual village. So whenever you go into that tavern, boom, you will see the massive boar head that you took down, type of thing. So there'll be trinkets as to, over time, as to what has happened around that village, that could be displayed within the bar area, in the tavern area, within, and that way you will always be reminded going into the town. So that's what I did, that's what we did, and perhaps only we can see it on our accounts, type of thing, because we've taken it down. Anybody new coming into the game, well, they're not going to be able to see that. They might just see the big boar outside still, or not even outside anymore. It's gone from the expansion, but it just adds richness to the story of the development. I think
definitely. So there's a lot of things they can do with expansions and content updates, and we've talked a lot about ways to keep us engaged. And because for me, the most that I want, what I would really love to see happen, is that if they do bring out an X-Pack, it's full of quality content, it's rich in its environment. It doesn't, and it should vary as well. It doesn't have to be new horizontal level progression. It doesn't have to be new zones and dungeons all the time. It can be just changing things up in the world, creating. They could basically pull a cataclysm in some form or fashion, with the option, obviously, to save my server from that happening, and add just new quests into the game through content updates. And Svarty, again, you've touched on something. We actually talked about that on previous shows, about having different unlocks on different servers, and the prime example was from earlier on from Josh. I don't know what Josh, why are you grinning like that? Did I miss something?
I just said basically that it was basically said in chat that it'd be pretty hard for devs to keep up with different worlds. So I said, no, if Josh is in world X, then give all rewards. So yeah, I said programming 101.
Right, so, but that's something we talked about. It is definitely something that would be tricky to track and to do. But again, it's a great idea. We talked about this, having something like a world event happen. So on every server, or to keep it minimal, there's 2 servers. Server A and Server B have this volcano erupt. Lava's running downhill towards the village. Now, Server A manages to stop it in time.
No, I wouldn't even go that. I wouldn't even start there. I would rather start at the volcano is starting to show signs of becoming active again, and therefore it could be a longer story to build up to the time where it will explode and lava will start flowing, or you manage to stop shamans or whatever causing the volcano to start up, whatever. So yeah, sorry, continue.
I was just trying to set the example.
Yeah. So go for
it. Right? So, what would happen? Server A stops it, Server B doesn't. You now have different outcomes on these servers. Server A's village is safe. They go about their business. The game hasn't changed. Apart from the volcano erupted. But on Server B, that village has been burnt down. The land has been put to waste. Now there's fire elementals there, and the sleeping lava dragon has been awoken, who's now roaming the lands. So now they've got a cool thing going on. If you think that's cool,
yeah.
We might not have a cool thing going on, but we managed to save that event, which creates different stories throughout shards. So, I could play on Server A and never experience the same thing that Server B is doing. Now, while that might be pretty cool, we've talked about this for PvP, we've talked about this for PvE, it's definitely something that would require a hell of a lot of work and a devoted amount of people that are just there to track all of the events going on, who's doing what, and preparing for the possible outcomes of what's going to happen, and to kind of pre-predict Server A, Server B is going to get this and get that, and so forth. It's definitely a cool idea, something I would love to see maybe in Pantheon 2.0, maybe in years to come. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that they can do, and what I think MMO developers should also focus on is look at the really cool games, single player games out there that set a precedent. If we look at The Witcher 3, some of the content and ideas excuse me, that have been put into that game, and there's others out there as well. There's a lot of things that they can utilize from these single player games. So anyway,
yeah.
Josh, do you want to add anything real quick, or should we get some questions, thoughts, ideas in? Because we've been rambling on and talking back and forth. And I kind of feel like we've been all over the place.
Yeah, I would say let's start with some questions, I think.
All right then, Shai, you got any questions, thoughts, ideas from anybody out there in chat?
Do I have questions? Oh my goodness. Yes, I have questions for you. Okay, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. #Science would like to know, Yarnilla and Josh, how much time do you think it should take a player, let's say playing 6-ish hours a day, 4 days a week, to hit level 50 and to level up crafting and be accomplished in perception?
You want to go first, Josh, or shall I?
For somebody to max out everything, especially in Pantheon, I would be happy if it took somebody 6 months at least to be able to max out on all those things, and that's playing 6 to 8 hours a day, basically.
Every day.
Every day. Oh, 5 days a week. Let's put it that way. So 6 months, I would say. I mean, you would have to have no life but play this game ultimately, and I don't think too many people will be able to do something like that.
I'm going to go a bit further with that. I think Just looking at it from just looking at it from that basic standpoint, from that question, from what you said there, perception crafting and getting to max level. I would like to see it. Basically, the perception should be something that takes a very long time, because you've got to think about how big this world's going to be, and I'm gonna put a long time frame on this. I'm gonna say at least 1.5 years is what I see. For the simple reason, I'll give you a reason why. Because of the amount of rich content that's going to be in this game. There's so much that you can indulge with. The perception system is so rich. The crafting system is very rich. And if the content is going to be very challenging and group focused, and don't forget, you got to look at your epic as well. We can't forget that. Alright, so that's got to come into it as well. So I'm going to say 1.5 years would be actually a very satisfying time frame for me, for the average player, not for the hardcore. For the average player, six hours a day, 5 days a week, on and off, 1.5 years.
Yeah, that example that I gave was obviously for the hardcore player. I mean, for the more casual player, I would say at least a year for them to get to max out certain things as well. I just think people might get frustrated with any longer than that. So yeah, but it's an interesting question, and it's something that VR will have to weigh up ultimately as to how they're going to deal with the progression of everybody, because you don't want people to rush through and within 3 weeks have maxed out things.
And again, it's really hard. It doesn't matter if you say the casual player, the hardcore player, you put a fixed amount of hours towards it. It's going to be very hard to actually define a reasonable amount of time. But, Glenn, I definitely agree. If it was up to me, it'd take me at least 3 years to get to level 50. Without having crafting done and perception. That would be the, woohoo, I'd be really happy. Because, when I look at this, the best way to describe why I say they shouldn't put a time restraint or a time period on leveling is, don't forget, this is an MMO, guys. A massively multiplayer online role-playing game. I want to be playing this game for many years to come. I don't want it to be a game. I want to see the vision that Brad has. I want it to be a living, breathing world. So there shouldn't be any... It's going to take you at least a year or 2 years or half a year or 3 years to get to that point. I just want to enjoy the game, go through it, because that's what it's about. It's an MMO. I'm online for a reason. I'm playing this type of game rather than a single player game that gives me maybe a week's worth of enjoyment on and off. No, I'm playing this MMO for a reason, because I want to be engaged. I don't want to see the end coming towards me, the cutscene cuts in, final credits roll, and I'm done with the game.
Yeah.
I never want to experience that.
Yeah, the problem I also have though is that we also got to think about the fun factor and the factor that most gamers are going to have in the game going forward. And I totally agree with everybody's comments over here. I'd also love to see the grind taking longer, because you obviously want to learn how to play your character to its fullest effect before going into raid, etc. So that, not like in today's games where you hardly know your classes anymore, but everybody in EverQuest would know their classes inside out before they hit the raiding stage type of thing. So yeah, I fully understand that. However, the new players that are going to come in also need to try and balance that through as well.
Day, I am so not going to ask that. Oh my god. Why do I like you?
Well,
right. Anyway,
I can't even.
Josh, were you finished? Can Shai give us the next comment, question, or?
I think Josh is pretty much finished after that comment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give us the next question, Shai.
From our very own Glenn, what about delivering content in between expansions, such as a class here or there, a race here or there, trade skill to keep things fresh? And then the devs could take their time making quality expansions while giving players what they want.
Yeah, definitely. There's nothing... It's like I said, for me, an expansion doesn't always have to be evolved around the next 10 levels, or the next race reveal, or the next class reveal, or the next zone or dungeon or raid reveal or whatever. This can be stuff that they can even put out there in a content update as a freebie. I mean, that would definitely go a very long way for them as developers, showing that community matters, and that it's not all about the money, even though it should be. Obviously, they should earn their money. But at the same time, it would be kind of rewarding to see that these guys really care about us and do something like this. And even if it's only once in a lifetime, that they give out a new race or a new class or whatever. I think if they wanted to, they could do that. There's definitely merit for it, and it would definitely go a long way towards the community.
Yeah, I think that from my point, and the 10 level quest part of it sparked the other thing that I was thinking about earlier on, in that putting it up by 10 levels every expansion type of thing destroys the items in the game, ultimately, because you are never going to require anything that's older than that, and they have to try and get out of away from the power creep type of scenario where they make older items useless. So it definitely should be more of a horizontal type of expansions rather than vertical, because vertical is useless.
Right, so on that note, before you bring up the next question, Shai, I've got to ask you, Josh. You've done. I guarantee you've done it. I'm not innocent either. We've all been there. We've all wanted to be top tier level, be up there with the cool guys.
Yeah.
With knowing that an expansion comes out, there's going to be the next 10 levels coming.
Yeah.
Have you rushed your character because of something like that?
I've actually rushed the next expansion, so made sure that I've got it way before most people have gotten it, through pre-purchase, that type of thing, and then because the guild obviously wants to raid the new content, destroyed that content within like about 2 weeks, for instance, 2 to 3 weeks, just to get to the point where we can start raiding that new content immediately to knock it out.
But you've also felt pressured, haven't you?
Oh, massively. No, the pressure was enormous to make sure you keep up with the rest of the guild, that you make sure that you aren't letting anybody down, and making sure that you can be ready for whatever the guild master wants us to do. So it really, it's a stress. It's constant stress. It's
definitely one thing that I despise is predictability. When I can predict that, hey, on the 14th of November 2018, the next expansion's coming out, and then boom, I've got to rush. Twink after twink after twink is followed up along the lines, get up there with the latest content, so that when the new expansion comes out, I can shoot off and go, so that I don't lose out. Everybody's been through that experience. Now, there's people who like doing that, and that's perfectly fine. You know, you're gonna have the hardcore raiders that are gonna go out there and want to do stuff. That is perfectly fine for them to go and do it. But content updates and X-Pack should not be just rated off of that stuff. Anyway, Chai, next one.
Okay, and again from Glenn, asking what if some expansions focused on adding higher level quests and dungeons to lower level zones in order to bring higher level tunes back to the older zones?
That's definitely what Pantheon's all about. We've already seen the newsletter from April with Black Rose Keep and what they talked about in there, and we've also heard the devs on streams talk about having zones mixed up in level where content's going to be available to multiple levels, and the same goes with like adding in dungeons or raid zones into the lower level content. And that's the thing that's been done though in almost every game's done that. I know EverQuest 2's done it. They've added higher tier dungeons to the lower level zones. It might have been agnostic or just a updated version of the older zone, mind you, but still they've done that. But yeah, it's definitely something that also impacts the world. And
well,
the thing, let me just finish this thought. The thing is though, for me, it's got to make sense though as well. There has to be a reason why this is happening, and this comes back to what Josh was talking about earlier on. Having us think that we're taking part in this fun, cool event where we're building this castle or this village, or we're helping the miners dig through this mountain, thinking nothing of it. We're thinking, hey, these are innocent miners or whatever doing their thing, and hey, guess what? Actually, these miners are evil. They've unlocked Pandora's box in that zone now. And now you've got high level content in there, and this raging evil goblin king that wants to take over the world and eat all the halflings and put them up on display. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. For me, I would be extremely happy. I would actually pat VR on the back. Can you hear me properly? Yeah. I would be extremely happy with VR if they only released 40% of the space within open level dungeons from the beginning.
Yeah.
So that they keep locked doors and cave collapses and things like that, and maybe tunnels and things like that.
Or maybe existing areas being blocked off.
New expansions.
Eye candy. Eye catchers. We've heard it from people already. Eye candy. You know, having stuff like that where you go into a zone or into a dungeon and you see this crack on the floor. We saw it in Jim Lee's stream.
Yeah.
Where they had this crack on the floor in Howley's Cave. You could see down underneath. Having stuff like that where it's there, but you just can't quite get to it because it's part of a expansion coming out or a world event that's going to be there for a short period of time. So it could only, it might be something that was recently discovered or unlocked, or that was caved in, and basically miners came in and took the rock away, and they discovered this cow. Definitely a cool idea. I would definitely be happy with that.
Yeah, and definitely on a new expansion, they should. If you're going into town and your perception picks up on somebody that says, "Listen, again, I'll just use something very generic. A key. Here's a key over here. I don't know what it's for, but it's useless to me. Go and use it and whatever." You can then remember, after exploring through Helnir's Cave, for instance, there was one door that you couldn't open. Then you've actually got to go now to try and figure out which door does it belong to. Is it Helnir's Cave? Is it Black Dagger Keep? Or whatever that key is specific towards.
And this is something that's always blown my mind, though, Josh. Looking at World of Warcraft, EverQuest 2, doesn't matter, you name it. Okay, Final Fantasy 11. It doesn't matter which MMO it was. We've all been in dungeons. We've all been, you know, some of them were instant. Some games had them open. Why they never did that anyway?
Yeah.
Even if you couldn't see this door or this caved in wall, there's no reason why they could just go into their game and say, we're going to take the ruins of Varzoon and now we're going to add another level down underneath it.
Yeah.
Why not? If you give yourself some thought, give it some thought about the lore and everything, why this could have possibly happened, and why we didn't know about it before. You know, it could have been, maybe it could have, you know, been buried under tons of rock long before this cavern, you know, the ruins of Varzoon were discovered, as a prime example.
Or for instance, the same miners that you spoke about earlier on, if they're not killed on a regular basis and they're given time to just keep on digging and digging and digging, it could be a year that they discover a new tunnel, or it could be 6 months, depending on if they're left alone or not, type of thing.
And to touch on Svarti's idea, a way for this maybe to... I mean, it's definitely going to be a hard one to kind of... Actually, no, it wouldn't. They did it in EverQuest 2, so forget about that. But anyway, the way I see this working for the player aspect of things is what Josh said earlier on, tied to perception. The more perception my perception level is, the more I start to realise the changes when I'm running through Haunia's cave. All of a sudden, for me, this pathway, this hallway, is now longer. You guys are running, I see you guys bouncing against the wall, I'm sitting there going, what the hell are these guys up to? Because you guys don't obviously have the perception. But maybe you could, you know, tie that to the group. Maybe if somebody has it in the group, they can all see it. But that would be something. You go in, somebody in the group's got the perception high enough. Nobody knows about it. Nobody knows that it's got to do with perception. And we're running down here, Haunia's cave, minding our own business, not thinking about a thing. And we carry on running. And hang on a minute, we've never been here before, have we? We explore. Oh, cool. This is brilliant. Now, this person leaves the group at some point in time. We go back into Haunia's cave because we think, hey, we didn't finish this area. And now we're like, hang on a minute, wasn't this area right here? That gets us to talking with the community. Gets us, you know, communicating with each other, socializing. That would be so cool to have.
Yeah, I agree.
So, next, if there's any...
Oh, I've got a few. Hashtag Science is asking Josh, do you think they have that kind of stuff planned where, with how they anticipate crafting to be incorporated into the game? Because there's like a Forge and Amber Fate.
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit earlier on where I thought it would be a great idea if VR had dedicated writers to make sure they plan the expansions for five or six expansions down the line, so that those type of things make sense. World events make sense, and they have some sort of a knock-on effect to add content into the world, add new crafting materials into the world, and everybody can just see a fresh new world over time. So yeah, I definitely think that they are planning for events like that in my mind.
I
was waiting for Yarn to jump in.
No, it's a question directed at Josh. I can agree with him. I've got nothing to say on that, so.
Okay, I was just kind of waiting for you to like hop in and give us your words of wisdom.
I have
Let's see. I'm going to be good. Okay, Glenn has a question about what do you want to see happening with trade skills and crafting in terms of expansions?
That's a good question, because we don't know all that much about crafting. And crafting is definitely a subject I'm very passionate about. I love crafting. I would actually like to see ways for me to actually expand my crafting horizons by maybe I start off as an apprentice, and when I'm level 50, I've just basically come out of my apprenticeship, and now I'm, you know, working towards becoming a master at my trade, and that might be something that comes with an expansion. Definitely new. Looking at the crafting options, it all comes down to the jobs. Again, for me, what I would love to see with crafting happen is variety. It doesn't have to be the same for each single crafting trade. This touches on the way we're approaching the class discussions that we're currently doing. That's what I would like to see happen. It's definitely a tricky one to answer at this point, Glenn.
Yeah.
Maybe this is one for a crafting show, but I'll say to keep it safe, I like to see variety and different things happen for all the different kinds of crafters, and not necessarily everybody have the same kind of approach to how they advance themselves or what they can advance into, things like that.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to see, as more expansions come in, you get a lot more interdependability between the crafting professions, a lot more horizontal type structures, so that, for instance, if you hit level 50 as a crafter, you now can start to unlock more specialized areas within that crafting skill. So you can maybe smelt harder metals, for instance. You can mix certain metals together to create a harder type of substance, to create more magical swords type of thing. So and you can start to craft more items, maybe, or items a lot quicker, going through the horizontal levels as well. So yeah, I definitely think that that would be a great way to go in expansions.
One thing I do want to note though and add, which I thought was really cool, was when EverQuest 2 had an expansion, they had these world events going where you had to build the portal spires or the druid rings and so forth. I kind of like to see something like that happen as well for crafters, or anybody who wants to get involved, who want to participate, where we might have to build portal gates to get to the next world and stuff, and you know, to be able to travel there, or maybe have us pretend that we're building the zone, like we mentioned earlier on. They plant this building in the zone where you would travel to that new area, for instance, and you think, hey, I'm going to help build this, and then all of a sudden, again, the evil dragon comes along, or an earthquake happens, and you think, oh, this thing's disappeared, and it's just a fun event. But no, it hasn't. You've actually built, or you know, gotten yourself the first glance at what maybe a new dungeon's going to look like, or and you're none the wiser. So things like that as well to happen. But crafting for me is definitely variety, and I do like the ideas that Josh had, but I'm just basically lost for thought at the moment. I wasn't really expecting crafting questions. You caught me off guard, Glenn. Not very nice.
Good one, Glenn.
You made me look really sad, man.
You ready?
Go for it.
All right. And again from our favorite Glenn. Could the perception system tie into the world events discussed earlier?
Definitely. Perception, for me, is one of their biggest game changers that they have. And it can tie into your character, your race, faction, world events, quests, raid zones, dungeons, zones. You can put faction or perception almost in anything. It can be utilized and used on almost every level if you give it just enough thought. So yeah, definitely.
I think perception definitely in world events can be utilized, and can maybe allow you to be more prepared for the upcoming world event that might be occurring. So you might be able to sense things a lot quicker than other people with if you've got a high perception, and allow you to be more focused on it. Yeah, so definitely.
Well, I got just quick one to add though with perception. I just had another brainy idea. Wouldn't it be cool? Would you find this cool, Josh? If you had a higher perception and expansions coming out, you might be revealed more on the lore behind what's to come, and I'll be none the wiser. Would you find that cool, or would you find that something that could put people off? That you know maybe a little bit more about the expansion than what's been revealed to the general public because your perception's higher.
I think it would be pretty cool, personally. To get little tidbits and maybe ways to prepare for that new expansion that might be coming. I don't know how they would do it, to be honest. I'm clueless as to how I would be affected with my perception in terms of that. But yeah, I think that would be pretty neat to see these type of things happening in the world.
Yeah, and just to quickly finish off as well, again on perception, what Glenn asked, it can also be used for crafting and guilds, like people are already chatting about. It can be used on every single mechanic that they have in game. Apart from, I couldn't see a use for your skill trees or AA necessarily, but for the mechanics around all of that, definitely. So yeah. Next.
From late 11, how about your perception triggers there? You get the message all the time, leading to nothing, but the expansion secretly actually unlocks the spot where you saw it at level 15.
I love that kind of stuff. That's what gets me, like, it's one of those love-hate moments where you think the devs are pulling your leg. It was all for nothing. I got frustrated at the last expansion from not the one that just basically came out, the one before that with EverQuest 2 where we were playing, where we went and did our Epic 2.0.
Oh yes, where you ditched me. Yeah, I remember that.
And I was like, how the hell am I meant to figure this out?
It wasn't just Jan, it was me as well.
I was like, I got sent into Antonica to find a freaking rat hole to click on. And that started me off on my adventure to do my Epic 2.0. I was like, and I didn't get a letter. I didn't have an NPC to talk to. I was like, what the hell? Who came up with this stuff? That was poorly implemented, but I would dig that kind of stuff, definitely. Where you think at the point of time, your perception leads you somewhere on a treasure hunt, and it leads. At first glance, it leads to nothing, and then the expansion comes out, and you're on your merry way again. Like I said before, you're minding your own business, running through Avendir's Pass to that area, and all of a sudden you look again. It's like that wasn't there before, and boom, off you go. You've now finally unlocked that little secret. Definitely love it.
I just hope perception doesn't ruin, or the internet doesn't ruin the perception system. So, it outlining step by step how to, for instance, get your epic in the game, whereas it would use perception to find these various clues within the game. it might actually do something like that. But that's just a side note.
I'm just reading up on what they said there. And again, it doesn't have to... Like I said, it doesn't have to be implemented in it. But one thing the devs did point out to everybody is... if you adventure your character and are a keeper, it's going to have benefits. And that's perfectly fine. People who put the time in to do all the crafting, all the adventuring stuff, and all the perception stuff should have benefits over that person who only does the crafting, or only does the adventuring, or only concentrates on perception. They even mentioned basically being a crafter and an adventurer is going to hold benefits as well. So, again, it comes down to a challenging game, and not everybody's going to be able to play the hero in the game. Some people are going to be better at it, some people aren't going to be good at it, period. So, yeah, that's how I would kind of look at it, Day. It doesn't have to be everywhere, but people should get benefits for the time they put in. Risk versus reward as well.
Yeah. Next.
And the next question was from Svarty. And Svarty, I lost your question. I can't find it. I'm sorry. If you remember what it is, send me a tell, and I'll ask it. We have one from Late 11. And it's not quite on topic, but...
We've been off topic for the last 25 minutes, I think.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. What would you guys think about guilds manipulating PvE stuff or infiltrating other guilds? Example, Guild A has a rogue with his specific class skill advanced and infiltrate Guild B's archive, who happens to have a priest with a rare skill info.
Number one, go watch our PvP shows. We talked about that. Go watch our guild show. We talked about that. Number three, Dropper mentioned a long time ago on a article on, I want to say MMORPG.com, where he talked about guild alliances and guild warfare. So for PvP, yes. For PvE, I would like to see something like that, but I don't have a general idea on how we could necessarily have guild warfare going on. Alliances, definitely. Warfare, the only way I could see that happen is with some kind of diplomacy, or some kind of way where we can plot land in the world and put a guild house down, where we might have certain valuable items or you know, harvesting materials in our plotted land. So there's definitely food for thought for that one, but I can see it working. Possibly also in PvE, but I just don't quite have the mindset to figure out how and why. But I could see it happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I would only have that locked behind PvP servers, to be honest. I must admit, if I've been traveling down to dungeon after dungeon to find that rare recipe, just to have some little twerp come along and steal it from underneath my nose, I will drop the game.
Nice choice.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely merit and means to bring in warfare, but not on that level, like you suggested. PvP, yes, for that kind of stuff. I'm sure there's ways for us to have guild warfare on a purely PvE basis, where... But yeah, that's for a different discussion at some point, maybe.
And Svarty did let me know his question. And again, I apologize, Svarty. I've got fat fingers tonight. So, what are your opinions of temporary content, as in something getting added and then removed, not something that was and changed?
I want all of it, because that gives me something to tell my guildies that weren't there, or new people that have come into the game months down the road. You know, and looking back and talking to people outside of the game as well. So what drives you towards this game, man? Why are you playing Pantheon? Well, this is why. I can tell them this story. This happened. My guildmates didn't witness it. I had a cool story to tell. It's something that I'm going to remember for a very long time. And they're going to experience something completely different. So having content come and go is a known factor in many games, in many MMOs. That's what these world events do. That's what these events do for when they bring out expansion packs. So it's perfectly fine to implement something like that.
Yeah, I agree.
And that was all the questions.
Cool. We made it.
I know.
I hope we didn't. Well, I know we did, but I hope it wasn't too much of a bother that we completely sidetracked here.
Yeah.
But again, expansions are definitely something to be very thoughtful about. And I think the best way for them to handle this is, like we said at the very beginning, is to definitely put a team behind the game that are tracking, like putting out hotspots in the zones to see where are the most players currently running around and doing what, you know, how, if there's ways for them to track this kind of data. I think that's going to be the key factor for them to figure out when they want to release an expansion. And I don't think they should put a time frame necessarily on it. They shouldn't wait obviously too long. Anywhere between a year and 3 years, I think, for a reasonable, cool expansion with obviously content updates in between, will be refreshing. If I don't have to look at my watch or look at the calendar and mark, I can mark in then and then's the expansion coming out. If it varies, if it's maybe after 6 months one comes out, and then 3 years later the next one, and then a year later the next one, I'm perfectly fine with that kind of variation. As long as it's not on a fixed schedule, and obviously looking at what the content is they're going to be bringing out. So maybe smaller, maybe bigger. So yeah, that's my final thoughts on this.
Yeah.
To basically utilize all the tools that you have at your disposal to figure out what's best for you. And yeah, go on, Josh.
So I would make sure that there's a lot of planning and a lot of structure built into the expansion process by VR, where they have firstly plenty of content built out for about 3 to 4 expansions down the line. It doesn't have to be all complete, but at least they have a guideline and a map towards how they're going to do it. They have also certain measuring tools within the game itself to make sure that they can follow the progress of people, to make sure that the people aren't going to get bored and run out of content. And that can help them to either bring people on board or to slow down their creation of new content type of thing. I differ slightly with Jan when it comes to expansions. I would like some sort of a fixed idea when expansions might happen, simply because it allows me to also plan my play style, not just float along and just run out of things. But that's just my point of view.
Let me quickly clarify that though, Josh. You'd be given sufficient time though, knowing that the expansion is coming, so it wouldn't be something that, you know, is up in the air per se.
Yeah,
you'd still have, I would still want to have sufficient notification that, hey, we plan to bring out an expansion then and then. But it doesn't have to always be on a yearly basis or they don't have to fix it to a certain time period every expansion. They can vary it there. That's how I kind of look at it. But I still want to be notified with enough time that I can...
I get your point from a player point of view. That makes perfect sense. But from a development point of view, it is extremely difficult to work that way when you obviously need to make sure that you've got a 5-year plan down the line.
Well, they're definitely going to have. They are definitely. They most probably already have content ideas for expansions. They might even have the whole draft of the next expansion that they plan to do in a desk drawer.
Yeah,
they'd be crazy not to. They got some kind of idea of what they want to do, and they'll have a 5-year plan or whatever. And if they have a plan, then and they have tools to track, and they have the people to put the manpower and the time into it, I don't see them having any trouble at all doing it one way or the other. So there's definitely ways for them to counteract the difficulties and blindsiding that can happen to them if they're not careful. And one thing I just had a really cool idea. I think you might like this one, Lady 11, on your Guild Warfare, and I think Josh might like this one as well. How about if the rogue who infiltrates my guild, because let's say for instance now he's come, he came once upon a time, he came to visit, and he saw that my guild got the dragon head from such and such a raid zone. Now maybe with the guild warfare kind of thing, he might be able to, because he might have a certain perception or something like that, or might be a rogue ability, he might be able to infiltrate my guild and at least find out, touching on what you said, information on how to maybe obtain this dragon head, because his guild's not figured it out, or his raid haven't figured out where to get this head from. Maybe that's some way you can implement the kind of warfare system where people can find hints through perception maybe, or through some kind of bluff ability that hints at them, this is what you got to do, or this is where you got to go, or this is roughly about this area is where you might find further information on this particular being or whatnot, something like that. Just for fun, and it's purely fluff.
I would have it so when the rogue touches the head of the dragon, he goes into a vision and sees our raid force destroying this dragon, and then it pushes him back and out of the guild.
Pushes him out of the guild.
or the vision, for that way.
Yeah, so I think we've sidetracked, and I'm sorry for sidetracking.
So the bouncers would essentially grab him.
And this is definitely something we're going to be keeping an eye on, and be talking further upon once we obviously get to know more on the ideas. And if you guys have ideas as well, bring them to us and we'll talk about them. For next week, we've shifted around the initial show that was Death and Death Penalty to accommodate the Druid. For those that don't know, Dropper from VR and Basgrim sat down at PAX East, and he got to interview Dropper and talk about all the 12 classes and the Bard, and talk about, or give some further information on the individual classes at what they could possibly expect from them. And the only bit of information we got from the Druid, and this is why we're going to go and talk about this, because this just went like, I just went all over the place with this, was indirect healing is how we can picture the Druid be played. So he'll have indirect heals, and I thought that's actually pretty damn cool, and this actually made me finally decide on my main character, which is going to be the Druid. I'm going to stay true to the Druid. So we're going to talk about the Druid, on what...
What are we going to do after the 5 minutes we've spoken about the druid?
Hey, I'm going to slap you in a minute, alright? Druids rock, alright? We've got plenty to talk about, and on our Twitter feed as well, Pantheon_VoT, we're actually having a poll. What was that? I didn't hear.
Summoners are better.
Actually, they could be. I loved what he had to say about them.
That's my main.
That's what. And we talked about that way back. I think episode 11 or something like that, or 12, was when we did the summoner discussion, and we talked about having the summoner do more than just summon magical items or weapons or food. We talked about actually being able to summon beings that come out from from an alternative universe, maybe.
It would be very nice to live up to our name of being a summoner.
Exactly. So anyway, guys, we hope you enjoyed the show, and I apologise again for sidetracking. I wasn't used to I wasn't expecting such a calm and quiet discussion today. Not having Lexa here put me completely off.
I miss you, Lexer.
So with that, guys, we'll see you all next Friday for the Druid, and thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you all then.
Cheers, guys.
Enjoy your Friday.